Welcome, everybody, to the Alpha Koncepts Podcast, where we'll discuss everything in the gun culture from gears to training. And today I have a special guest, Massad Ayoob, who should need no introduction. Mas, how are you doing today?
Not bad for an old guy. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. Thank you very much for being on the show. Like I said, you should need no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. We can do a whole episode just talking about your resume, but would I be out of line to say you're one of the nation's foremost expert witnesses when it comes to self-defense trials?
Oh, some people have been kind enough to say so. Be pretty arrogant if I said
it. You're very humble. But no joke, I mean, all jokes aside, you've been involved in many cases. If I recall correctly, you sit on the board for the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, and you're one of the people that gets the call if a law-abiding gun owner ever has to use his firearm in self-defense and a fanatical prosecutor decides that they want to pursue charges. Am I correct?
Well, I'd be one of them. I've been doing the expert witness thing since 1979.
So safe to say. Go ahead.
I've seen a few of the dirty tricks on the other side. I can't say I've seen them all yet, but I've probably seen most of them by now.
I mean, it's safe to say you've probably been involved in 100 cases where somebody has been wrongly charged.
Well, involved way over that. We kill so many of them before they go to trial that I still don't think I've had to go to trial 100 times yet.
Wonderful.
This sort of thing.
I mean, and that's good news for the law-abiding gun owner who is just trying to protect himself. Not going to trial is definitely.
We need to realize that the great majority of prosecutors in America take their job seriously and take their oath of office seriously. Their job is not to mindlessly prosecute every case that comes across their desk. And it's every bit as important for their mission to exonerate the innocent as it is to prosecute the guilty. What we get is we do get the occasional one that is a political prosecution. We have to remember the chief prosecutor is generally an elected official and tends to respond to what he perceives as the pulse of the voters. What we also have is some people who handle the incident itself perfectly, but have never given any thought to how they're going to manage the aftermath and do things completely wrong. For example, the person who is in an armed encounter, the bad guy pulls the knife, they pull the gun, the bad guy flees. And if you've studied DGUs, defensive gun usages by private citizens in this country, that actually is the most common pattern. But then they sigh a sigh of great relief, they holster their gun, and they go home. And they do not pick up a telephone and call it in. And people don't realize, the average lay person, it's counterintuitive for them to think a criminal would call the cops. It happens all the time. If you've got a genuine bad guy, he's been going through the revolving door of the criminal justice machine since he was a juvenile offender, and he knows how things work. He does not appreciate your having pulled this role reversal on him. So he's going to ditch his gun. He's going to call the police and say, hey, this crazy guy pulled a gun on me for nothing. Describe you, maybe give them your license tag. And now he has become the victim complainant. Only the National Rifle Association has a role for heroic armed citizens. Criminal justice system, it's basically victim complainant and suspect. Whoever calls in first assumes the role of complainant. Now you're the suspect and you've already got a high hill to climb. The other problem that you have with that is virtually every concealed carry class, they parrot the advice, never talk to the police.
Oh, that's, no. In my concealed carry classes, I would never suggest such a thing.
Well, that's because you're smart. But the cops get there, they've got one guy saying this person did the awful thing. The person they're claiming did the awful thing, who actually was the good guy and the intended victim, says, I'm not talking to you until after I talk to my lawyer. Well, in the cops' typical experience, the genuine victim is the one who said that SOB did this thing and I'll testify against them in court. And the guy who usually turns out to be guilty is the guy who says, I ain't going to tell you nothing until my mouthpiece gets here. And basically, the perpetrator is now doing a very convincing imitation of the victim. The initial intended victim, the citizen who righteously defended himself, is unwittingly doing a remarkably good impersonation of a guilty criminal. And mommy was right when she told you only have one chance to make the first impression.
Sure.
And now that starts rolling along. Obviously, the prosecutor is the one who decides what will be charged. But the prosecutors tend to take on faith the impressions and the gut feelings of the cops that they work with every day. And handling it that way makes a very uphill fight for your defense attorney and a very expensive and debilitating one.
Right. Now, obviously, it is your right to remain silent, but what you're suggesting is in certain cases, you may be placing yourself at a disadvantage and actually opening yourself up to prosecution by doing so.
Well, you're kind of setting the stage for mistaken identity, if you will. I give my students a 5-point checklist. I tell them first, establish the active dynamic, what really went on here. And the active dynamic is not that you pulled a gun or even that you had to shoot somebody. The active dynamic is what that guy did to force you to take that action. This man attacked me. This man attacked my wife. This man was trying to drag my kid out of a car. Establish the active dynamic. Make it clear from the beginning who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. Second, I would make a statement to the effect, I will sign a complaint. I will be happy to testify against this man in court, whatever. You're reconfirming who's who, and you're speaking the officer's language. Third, for God's sake, point out evidence. People clam up, and evidence that would have proven their innocence disappears.
Sure.
Now, in all the emergency services, police, fire, or emergency medical, the highest priority is saving human life. You've had to shoot a guy. They are going to roll the paramedics. They're going to roll a gurney through the scene. They're going to trample that place like the elephants returning to the valley of the lost ivory. Spent casings get moved and it essentially alters the dimensions of the crime scene or even disappear.
And if I can...
The bad guy's dropped knife gets picked up by a passerby. And if you haven't pointed that out, that evidence is going to be lost.
Yeah, absolutely. In the city of Chicago, there are many, many instances where we've got video of, neighborhood thugs literally walking through a roped-off crime scene, kicking evidence and shell casings and stuff down the sewer drains. So it is very, very possible, very likely that is going to be the case.
Absolutely. Now, fourth, you want to point out witnesses. Ever since the Kitty Genovese murder in New York in 1963, I don't want to get involved has been a byword for the urban enemy of people who don't want to get involved in the criminal justice machine. If you don't point out the witnesses and they walk away, their testimony that would have vindicated you will never be found. The fifth point, I tell them at that point, I would stop answering questions and answer everything with, officer, you're going to have my full cooperation after I've spoken with counsel. I'd like to speak with my attorney now.
Right. And would you also agree that talking about feet and distance, and he was 6 foot tall, he was 25 feet away from me, he was running at me, those sorts of specifics are things that you absolutely do not want to discuss at all?
That's correct. Anybody who studied this can tell you anything that's going to trigger a body alarm reaction, and particularly a fight or flight response, like literally a near-death experience where you had to kill or die, there is a profound alteration of perception. Tunnel vision kicks in, and it's not happening in the eyes, it happens in the brain. The doctors call it cortical perception. In a survival situation, you're focusing so much on what you need to know and need to do to survive that the subconscious is screening out anything extraneous and on the periphery. Tunnel vision alters perception of distance. Ophthalmologists tell us if you have normal binocular vision, you're going through life looking at the world like it was you were a camera with a semi-wide angle lens. Fight or flight kicks in. Somebody just put on a 600 millimeter telephoto. One of the effects of that is the literal optical illusion that your opponent is closer than he is and larger than he is. And they ask you, how far away was he in feet and inches, which they shouldn't, but they always do. How big was he? And you're going to say, oh my God, he looked like 6'6". He was 3 feet away from me. And the surveillance camera shows, no, he was 3 yards away and he was maybe 5'9".
And now you're a liar.
You sound like a liar, and talk to anybody who served on a jury. If they perceive you to have lied to them once, they're not going to believe anything else you have to say. So my answer would be, how close was he? He was close enough to kill me, sir. That's why I defended myself. How big was he? He was big enough to kill me. That's why when he reached for my throat, I took the action I took.
And in a police-involved shooting, the law enforcement officer, he's not going to make any statements for a couple of days because of he needs to process that information and sort through what was real and what was not.
Actually, that's a common misperception. The general recommendation is to wait for a detailed debriefing for somewhere between 24 and 48 hours. Force Science Institute, right there in your backyard now, is recommending also one full sleep cycle. So basically, the brain's retrieval system can come back to normal. But every officer who's in a shooting does have to get what's called a public safety statement. Were shots fired? In what direction? We have to know, because if bullets were going north and south, north to south from you, and south to north at you, we don't know who in the houses around us might have been hit by one of those bullets, and we've got to check. If you had two perpetrators, you put one down and the other fled. We need to know that there's another perpetrator. We need his description because he's armed and dangerous. And if you're the civilian involved in one of these things, and you do not tell them, hey, the second perpetrator is, 5'10", red shirt, black pants, etc., and that guy kills somebody else the next day, you're going to have a hell of a hard time explaining you were the good guy when you left this dangerous person at large to prey on the innocent.
Sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense, what you're saying. And so basically, to reiterate, what you're saying is the police officer who was involved in the shooting is going to give a general description of what happened, so that
a bare bones description of what happened.
Right, and then the details will follow, as you said, a sleep cycle or two later.
Correct. And when I teach an officer-involved shooting investigation course to police, I tell them, do not be asking unanswerable questions. If we know that the auditory exclusion, tunnel hearing, for example, occurs in a great majority of these cases, and now we're going to ask the guy how many rounds were fired, exactly what words were said. Did you say, police don't move, or don't move, police? You're asking the impossible, and it ill serves the truth of the investigation.
And one other thing to point out is going back to your suggestion that it would be the aggressor calling the police. It might just be a witness calling the police that saw you draw your gun,
Sure.
thinks you're the bad guy, didn't know why you drew your firearm, and next thing they know, you've got the police coming on you. They gave your description, your license plate number, whatever the case is. So it definitely makes sense to immediately, when safe to do so, establish the fact that you're the victim and call the police. Because I learned something growing up in the city of Chicago, and that's that the little old ladies next door in the buildings, they're always looking out the windows. Nothing goes unseen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Be the complainant. I hate to have to tell people be the victim, but damn it, there's only two roles open in the play: victim and perpetrator.
Sure.
Whoever calls in first is going to be the victim, and you're going to be cast as the perpetrator by default if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell them, and anytime you're carrying a gun, carry your cell phone.
I mean, who doesn't carry a cell phone nowadays anyway? 9.5 out of 10 people are going to have a cell phone in their pocket.
Yeah, really. You think of your cell phone as your analog to the police officer's radio. It's immediately available emergency communications.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I spend too much time on social media, and I see a lot of jackassery going on, people making comments that I believe are ill-advised. For example, they'll post a picture or a meme that says, just one example, that trespassers will be shot and survivors will be shot again. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, people have to realize Facebook and the social media have become investigators' best friends, and sometimes plaintiffs' counsel's best friends. All that stuff is accessible. Stuff you thought you deleted isn't deleted. There is vast high-tech programs out there that have been developed for white-collar crime, tracking child pornographers, and that sort of thing, that will find damn near anything on every device that you've got. It is very common today in any kind of a serious investigation for us to be able to get a warrant to seize every hard drive you have access to. and our technicians will be going over that. And anything you said, kill them all, let God sort them out, that's going to come out in court. And they will be allowed to establish that because they have great latitude to establish what's called mens rea, meaning literally the guilty mind, the character of the defendant, which now will be you. And if you've been saying, kill them all, hang Biden, blah, 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 anything even remotely racist, for example, that's going to come out and it's going to be twisted. I don't do social media except for a moderated blog, which, brief plug, is at backwoodshome.com. Click on the blogs, and got about 13 years of not social justice, but criminal justice commentary, and of course, firearms stuff.
Yeah, I think I've told many people if it wasn't for my businesses, I wouldn't be on social media anymore anyways. But there's like anything, it's a double-edged sword. There's pros and cons, and certainly being, what I call internet bravado with those, silly memes. Let's say you were talking about, it's very common for someone to make a joke about killing their daughter's boyfriend. That is an incredibly common joke. And then let's say, God forbid, he flips out one day, they break up, and now he breaks into your house and is intent on doing you harm, and everything is otherwise in your mind justified. And the next thing you know, you are facing some charges because you were sharing these goofy memes a couple of years back.
Absolutely true, brother. Your life is an open book.
Yeah, there's no such thing as privacy. I was having that conversation yesterday. There's absolutely no such thing as privacy. But to the people who say that this is just an urban myth, I know that there was a case where an officer shot somebody in a hotel. It may have been Minnesota. I don't remember the state. And he had on his AR-15 dust cover, it said, "You're fucked." And
Yeah, that was Mesa, Arizona.
There you go. Definitely a long ways from Minnesota. So this is obviously not an urban myth. There are cases where prosecutors have used this type of a thing against someone, the Punisher skulls on the guns and social media comments. These are legitimate, actual cases that have happened, correct?
Well, it's absolutely true. And let me give you an idea what it costs. Now, you mentioned the dust cover case. That was Arizona versus Philip Brailsford in the very tragic death of Daniel Shavers about 4 years ago. Now, that officer's dust cover, number one, I think it cost him $1,750. The gun he used in the shooting was his privately owned department-approved AR-15, tricked out with all the red dot, the light, all 9 yards. You can explain the flashlight on the rifle, the weapon-mounted light. You can explain the red dot. How the hell do you explain that logo? Now, when the newspapers got hold of it, one particular alternate paper in Phoenix was, leading the lynch mob, calling for the officer's head. The officer was fired. And what you have to understand, that an officer-involved shooting, typically, the involved officer will be given administrative leave to come down from the stress of the critical incident, during which time the investigation will, of course, continue. He is paid for that time. If the officer is indicted, he will be suspended without pay pending the outcome of the trial or the outcome of the case. If the officer is convicted, of course, that's it. He's done. If the officer is acquitted, he will be paid for the lost time that he would have been on duty during that unpaid suspension. The officer will not be fired until such time as he has, in fact, been convicted. What happened in Brailsford case, he was fired almost immediately. And if you go back and do the Google search, the police department announced he was fired primarily for the conduct unbecoming an officer of that stupid dust cover.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that right there. You've been cut loose right there. You have become a fired cop, and it's on your record forever. They were able to keep that out of the trial. And brief digression here. The pretrial motions called motions in limine, in which both sides argue what evidence should or should not come in front of the jury. His attorney, Michael Picaretta, a brilliant criminal defense lawyer, did manage to keep that out. And you've got idiots on the internet saying, "Well, see, they kept it out, so it doesn't matter." Well, it mattered first because it got the kid fired to begin with. But I talked with Mike Picaretta, and the officer, by the way, was acquitted at trial. Mike, I asked him just your time, and remember, we're talking the kind of lawyer that, I don't know his exact fee, but I would guess it's at least $500 an hour.
Sure.
I asked him, Mike, just for your time, not counting paying your paralegals that you have to bill for, not counting the consults with your experts that you have to bill for, to craft the arguments, get all the details, get all the case law precedent to put in front of the judge, and make your argument. How much time did you put in just on that one little tiny element, that stupid dust cover? He said, well, just mine, not counting anything else, about 10 hours.
Right.
So now, the expert witness in that case was a colleague of mine. In fact, we both serve on the advisory board for Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, Emmanuel Capelson. Now, Manny is an attorney and one of the best expert witnesses in the country. Every year I run the panel of experts on deadly force and firearms training at the annual conference of ILETA, the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. A few months after the acquittal, I had Manny on that panel. I said, Manny, give us a briefing. You did an excellent job, and you were pivotal in winning the acquittal. Counting everything, counting your consultation time and Picaretta's legal fees and the paralegals research and all that, just to win that one tiny stupid argument about the dust cover to keep it out. What do you figure that cost? And Manny said, I'd say between $15,000 and $20,000.
Wow.
Now, when you do stuff like that, when you buy, whether it's a bumper sticker or, something you're putting on your gun or doing to your gun, do a cost-benefit analysis. What am I getting for this, and what's it going to cost me? Well, it cost him, it probably was one of the pivotal things in that trial taking place to begin with, and that indictment to begin with. It certainly was pivotal to the officer's firing. And $15,000 to $20,000 to win the argument in court. And they were lucky to win it because that could have gone either way. Judges have great latitude on that. Yeah, the argument with the "you're fucked" dust cover, it goes to what's called indicia of malice. The other side is getting great latitude to establish that you had malicious intent or a malicious personality, and that's indicative of criminality. In this particular case, it was kept out. But when you figure what it cost to do it, as much as $20,000 just to win that one silly argument on that one little piece of evidence, and you've got to remember that could have gone either way. It's very subjective, and judges have great latitude on what they will allow in and will not. The test is probative value versus prejudicial potential. Probative value, the guy bringing in the evidence wants to say, Your Honor, this will help the jury come to the truth of the matter. Prejudicial potential, the attorney for the defense is saying, Your Honor, they're just trying to inflame the passions of the jury against my client. This has nothing to do with the issues in the case. It should be kept out. The judge did keep it out in Brailsford's case, but it could have gone either way. And what benefit do you possibly get from that, or the Punisher's skull on the backplate of your Glock, or the grips of your 1911?
You just get a few giggles at the range, and beyond that, there is no benefit. And like you said, cost-benefit analysis, are those giggles worth $20,000, $30,000? I don't think so.
Yeah, macho bullshit never helps in court.
That's well put. And, a common meme that I see going around nowadays is the one about, train plows on the front of trucks, and it's my protester stopper and things of that nature. I think that's pretty timely. A lot of people, there's countless situations where protesters are blocking highways and roads, and there's probably a dozen, if not more, situations where some of these protesters are getting hit, and some of these drivers are being charged. And I wouldn't doubt that a prosecutor finding that sort of social media post or comment being made is going to absolutely 100% use that against the person. And I mean, that's a very hot topic. Is that something you kind of want to speak on? These situations where roads are being blocked and people are hitting the protesters. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, the first big thing is don't go. Don't go. Your presence is not going to change public mind or alter official approaches to public issues. Once you are there, if you went to the protest to protest or to counter-protest, and you're attacked and you have to defend yourself, look what's happening to the poor Rittenhouse kid up in your guys' neck of the woods.
Right.
Now, you're seen as having gone looking for trouble. You're seen as a willing combatant. It may not be the case. Rittenhouse, obviously it's premature to discuss because all the evidence hasn't come out.
Agreed.
But the evidence that has come out, it virtually 100% favors Rittenhouse. The kid that day was scrubbing graffiti off walls. He went up to Kenosha to do essentially the same thing. According to his defense attorney, he did not bring an AR-15. And if you look at compare the pictures on Facebook of him holding an AR to the one he's holding during the incident, it's clearly not the same rifle. According to the defense, he was up there hoping to help. He's got his med kit and all that, and actually did treat at least one patient, maybe more. It had become violent. There were gunshots. He was asked to assist in being sort of a security presence, if you will, at one of the businesses that had already been severely damaged by the rioters. And it was suggested to him, hey, this is dangerous. If you want a gun, you can have one. And he was lent someone else's firearm. So basically, if you start digging into it, he appears to have gone with a benevolent intent, not a malicious intent. Yeah, you've seen how many people are calling him a vigilante, alt-right, and all this BS.
Racist. I mean, I can't count the number of comments I've read, people calling him racist simply because, but there's nothing to back that up. There's not one shred of evidence to back up that claim, but that doesn't stop people from saying it.
Well, exactly. But the thing of it is the fact that you went there. Juries tend to be very unforgiving of people they see having gone looking for trouble.
What if you're just driving home from work? You're on your way home, you're listening to the radio, all of a sudden traffic comes to a dead stop and there's 100 people in front of you.
Yeah, it's a good idea to have a Waze app, WAZE. It lets you know about traffic jams, things like that, and should let you know if the traffic, if you start seeing big traffic jams and it's obviously not an accident on the highway, nature is telling you to get around it anyway, just for the logic of, getting home and not losing an hour sitting in traffic, but also can help you steer clear of that. If you see a crowd of people on the road waving signs, nature is telling you get off the road, back up, make a U-turn if necessary, and avoid the situation as much as possible. As far as, long guns in the car, what gun for rioters is the common thing now on the internet. Basically, pulling an AR-15 and getting out of the car with, 50 people videoing you on your iPhone is not going to make you look very much like the victim. I would say with a concealed handgun and keep it as concealed as I could until I had to expose it.
Now, let me ask you this. Obviously, the use of force, which is likely to cause death or great bodily harm, is not limited to a handgun. Your vehicle can be a deadly weapon just the same as a firearm can. So,
well, it can be. Just in the last couple of days, you saw the video clip in the Sacramento area. The mob surrounds a CHP patrol car. One guy starts climbing onto the car. As the officer pulls away, the guy falls off the car, and you've got this whole meme of CHP runs over protester.
Mm-hmm.
So be expecting it. The media seems to be very much biased to the left in this particular issue. And be asking yourself if a complaint is filed, if someone is injured and all that, what is it going to cost you to get out of it? I'd urge you also, if you were in that situation and had to drive away, turn on your emergency flashers, lay on your horn. That is not consistent with something like the Charlottesville killer that raced his car into a crowd, wasted 20 people, and killed one of them.
Right, and you're going to get caught if you were to do something like that. There's 1,000
Oh, of course.
cameras. I mean, no doubt about it. And you speak about your pyramid of the perfect affirmative defense, and that applies to any act of self-defense, the ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. And if I'm sitting in my car, and of course you could play the what if game and you change one minor
Yeah.
detail of the scenario and the entire scenario changes, but I'm sitting in traffic. There's protesters in front of me pounding on my car, trying to smash my windows. I can be honest with you. I don't think I'd pull my gun. I think I'd simply take my foot off the brake and try to get out of there. Now, charges may be filed. They're going to say what they want to say, but I believe, again, change a small fragment of the scenario, the entire scenario changes. But I believe in many of these, not all, scenarios that I've seen videos of, there is the ability, the opportunity, and their actions are certainly articulating an intent to cause harm. So that would, in my opinion, my layman opinion, be an affirmative defense. I felt my life was in danger. They had the immediate opportunity and ability, and their actions and their words manifested that intent, that jeopardy. Was that something you think I'm out of base with that, or you think I'm online, or what are your thoughts?
Well, it's more complicated than it sounds. First, for your listeners who aren't familiar with the AOJ triad, picture, rather than a pyramid, I would describe it as a table. The top of the table where your defense rests, if you have had to use this degree of force, is a situation of immediate, otherwise unavoidable danger of death or great bodily harm to yourself or to other innocent people that you have the right to protect. Now, that table is supported by three legs, and those three legs are the criteria that different academies use different terms, but the most common is ability, opportunity, and jeopardy, as you described. By ability, it means the power to kill. The opponent has all this speaks to the opponent rather than you, the opponent's abilities and actions. Ability is the power to kill. It could be deadly weapons, could be also what the law calls disparity of force. They're ostensibly unarmed, but many of them against one of you, force of numbers, someone much larger and stronger than you. Position of disadvantage. The guy has just broken through the window. You are seatbelted in a bucket seat. Basically, that's your limited mobility now. It's as if he had an accomplice who was pinning your arms behind you while he pounded on you. The opportunity factor means they're capable of immediately employing that power. They're 100 yards away saying, if you come through this intersection, we'll set your car on fire. Well, 100 yards away, they're not going to be able to set your car on fire. They probably couldn't even throw a Molotov cocktail that far. So while the ability exists, even if the guy's holding the lit Molotov cocktail in his hand, the opportunity does not, and it would not be justified on that basis alone of harming him. The third element, and really the big element, is the jeopardy factor. Jeopardy is best described as manifest intent. It's the opponent's words and or actions that manifest an intent to cause death or great bodily harm, that is, crippling or disfiguring injury. A verbal threat, violent physical action, or a combination of the two. So if there's a crowd in the street and the crowd is suddenly swarmed around you, but they're not harming you specifically, they're chanting slogans or something like that, the manifest intent element is not present.
Absolutely.
Even though they're close enough that they could harm you, there are enough of them to harm you. They start pounding on the car. My insurance is going to cover body work, for the most part. They start trying to break into the car. It's a different thing entirely. Think of it as a walnut. Nobody cracks a walnut unless they intend to devour the nut meat inside. Nobody starts trying to get into a car in a situation like that unless they have harmful intent to those inside. And all of that would have to come together. They start breaking the windows, my gun is probably going to come out.
Yes, and that walnut analogy is one I'm going to adopt and use moving forward, because that's absolutely perfect. No one's cracking a walnut and then throwing it away. They're not cracking it for the enjoyment of cracking it. They're cracking it to get at what's inside. So that's a excellent analogy. So now you teach a 20-hour and a 40-hour class called the MAG 20 and MAG 80. Tell me about that.
Well, the MAG 40 class is our baseline. Usually done in 4 10-hour days. The shooting component will encompass about 500 rounds live fire, and we cover rapid draw from concealment, safe holstering under stress, shooting one hand, dominant hand, shooting non-dominant hand only, shooting two-handed in the various stances, cover positions, speed reloading. We cover the tactics, of course. We spend more than an hour on the subtleties of taking people at gunpoint and hopefully controlling it without any blood being shed. More than 60%, probably 65% of the class is classroom. Some of the safety stuff, of course, is done on video. What I've done is break the MAG 40 into 2 20-hour components, MAG 20 range, which is the safety portion and the shooting, and MAG 20 classroom, which is the deadly force, understanding the law, understanding affirmative defense, the tactics of it, criminal psychology, patterns of attack, and strategies that have been known to defeat those patterns of attack. And we go very strongly into aftermath management, interaction with responding officers, with investigating officers, even with witnesses at the scene, and management afterwards if there is an indictment or probably more likely a lawsuit. The two of those classes together equal a MAG 40. And the MAG 40 is the prerequisite for the higher level classes. The next one up, another 40 hours on top of that, is MAG 80.
Wow.
The numbers come from cumulative hours spent with us. That gets more hands-on. You'll be shooting while you're moving. The distances will increase. The speed of shooting will increase. In the first level class, you shoot a standard police qualification that you have to pass to get your certificate. In the second level class, you'll shoot the same police course, but twice as fast. The second level class also encompasses the long gun, the defensive shotgun and carbine. And we start getting in a hand-to-hand and combatives, a physical fight that involves a firearm, keeping the other guy from getting your gun away from you, what we call weapon retention, and disarming him if, as is often the case, if he starts with his gun out and yours is in the holster and you're close enough, you can get his gun quicker than you can get yours and still solve the problem. So it's a much more physical class. The third level encompasses greater speed still, a lot more what-ifs. It's a lot more vigorous class, and also has a full auto weapon component, partly because a lot of our students travel internationally, and when you get into other countries, you're often someplace where you can't carry a gun. But if something breaks out and the only gun you can reach is a terrorist's dropped AK or a police officer's dropped MP5, I kind of like you to know how to run it. And finally, by then, you'll have spent like 120 hours with me in an area of some fun. And that's another reason we put in the full auto component. But most of our training is the 20s and the 40s.
Everyone needs to shoot full auto at least twice in their life. It's one of the most enjoyable experiences you'll have.
Well, yeah.
Damn gun laws. So, Mas, in your 20-hour component, the 20-hour class where you spend the time talking about interaction with law enforcement, justified use of force, etc., if you were to address a new gun owner, which there are millions across the country just in the last year, and especially in Illinois, Illinois has topped the record for the most guns sold in the first 6 months. If someone came to you and said, hey, I just bought this gun, and you were to say to them, okay, you may need to use this firearm to defend yourself at some point in your life, and if you do, this is what you need to know to stay out of jail. You've got 5 minutes. What would you tell them?
Well, the first thing before I talk to them about staying out of jail would be to make sure they have their firearm safety component down if they're a first-time gun owner. It's unlikely you're going to be in a gunfight. It is 100% likely that you now have a lethal weapon in your home, and you've got to know how to secure it, how to safely handle it, load it, unload it, check it, clean it, and all of that. So I want you to have that before you take my MAG 20 classroom course. Once you're in the class, presuming that you know at least the rudiments of safe firearms handling and shooting. We start off with explaining the legal standards, the guiding yardstick of judgment, if you will, is the ancient common law doctrine called the doctrine of the reasonable person. It's basically a three-pronged test delivered in one sentence. What would a reasonable, prudent person have done in the exact same situation, knowing what the shooter knew? And we told them they have to document their training as much as possible because they're not going to get a jury of fellow gun enthusiasts. The other side during jury selection is going to specifically screen out people like you, for example. So they're going to be able to. They're going to need to be able to explain to someone who's never thought about it why they chose to have a gun in the first place, how they perceived the danger, and how they came to the decision to perform the action for which they're now being judged. So we explain the ability, opportunity, jeopardy elements, as we just did, the criteria which create the situation of immediate, otherwise unavoidable danger of death or great bodily harm. We go into understanding the affirmative defense. If you've ever heard someone say, wow, you seem to be guilty till you're proven innocent, that's kind of true. In the affirmative defense, we're not saying we didn't do it. We're stipulating to the act, yeah, I shot this guy, but we're taking the position that we were correct in taking that action. And in real-world jury psychology, no matter what the black-letter law says, when people hear you say, or hear your attorney say, yeah, my client shot him, they hear a confession to murder. And in real-world jury psychology, you're going to have to turn that around to let them know, yeah, look, if you had been in my situation, you would have picked up the gun and you would have shot this guy too. So the good news with a self-defense plea is an affirmative defense. We stipulate that we did it. We maintain we were correct in doing it. The good news is once it's established, it's a perfect defense. The judge's instructions to the jury are going to sound something like, look, if you believe the defendant's story, you must find him not guilty. The bad news is that shifting of the burden of proof. Even though the black letter law seems to say once self-defense is on the table, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to show beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense. Now, first, for you to get that on the table at all, prior to trial, you're going to have to meet what's called burden of production. That means you're going to have to show the evidence, or show the judge some corroborating evidence, eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, something that supports it. You can't just say, take my word for it, it was self-defense. So that's a burden of proof element right there. But real-world jury psychology, you've all seen the people who think any homicide is murder. They think the two terms are synonymous. And justifiable homicide is an alien concept to them. Do not doubt that you're going to have some of those people on your jury. I've seen it happen. The burden really psychologically, real-world jury dynamics is on you and your defense team to show that jury that you did the right thing. We get into the interaction elements, how to deal with someone at gunpoint, interaction with witnesses, how to keep the witnesses from getting the wrong idea, interaction with responding officers that you and I have already touched on a little bit in this interview, and finally, interaction with investigating officers. Once you've retained counsel, how to manage a proper interview, because we don't say interrogation now because the term is too harsh.
Mm-hmm.
And basically how to establish step by step, brick by brick, you had no choice but to shoot this guy. We get a lot into the tactics of it. We also spend a good hour on dealing with the psychological and emotional aftermath of having had to use deadly force. Look at what the Rittenhouse kid is going through now. Look what George Zimmerman went through now. His shooting was in February of 2012. All these years later, he is still virtually unemployable. His parents virtually live in hiding because they got so many death threats for simply having brought their son into the world. Commentators were calling George the most hated man in America. Now, we explained to them how these memes, where all these memes come from. why they need an attorney who's going to have the guts to call a press conference and get your side out. Because if they follow the old paradigm of we never discuss our cases in the press, look, the case is being tried in the press
Yes.
by the other side, and you're failing to represent your client if you don't in that other court, that court of public opinion. I remind them when I do CLE courses for defense attorneys, look, your client has a world to go back to. His family has to live in that world. If that's a world where the public has been brainwashed into believing your guy is a monster and his tricky lawyer got him off, what kind of a hollow victory is that? What kind of a Pyrrhic victory is that? So we don't do a lot of pontificating. We do a lot of explaining brick by brick. Here's how these things are established. Here's how, as much as possible, you live your life in a way that will avoid these conflicts. If the conflict comes up, get your gun on the bad guy before he can get his on yours, and probably you stop the fight there. If you haven't, here's where to shoot, here's how to shoot, and here's how to manage the aftermath.
Absolutely great advice, especially about avoiding, because you win the fight that you're not in. And then if you can avoid the fight, all of everything else you said becomes inconsequential. You don't have to worry about the prosecutor. You don't have to worry about, what your lawyer may or may not say, because you win the fight that you're not in 100% of the time.
Yeah, live a cautious lifestyle. From the late psychologist William April, who tragically passed all too early this year, all the way back to Sun Tzu. A battle avoided is a battle won, a battle with no casualties.
I think that is an excellent point that you've just made to end this conversation. I really, truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with myself and allow the listeners to hear some very valuable advice and valuable information. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, Mass, how can they reach you?
The best bet is simply to go to my website. We have the classes all around the continental United States and occasionally Alaska. It's MassadAyoobGroup.com. That's MassadAyoob Group.com. That will lead to all the classes that we offer and what the prerequisites might be for some of them. It will also, if you find one in a location that's handy for you, it will have the contact for the host. You would sign up through the host. You'll need to provide a photocopy of the concealed carry permit or some other proof of having passed criminal record check prior to being accepted into the class.
Excellent. That's good to know. Everyone should look out for that class in their area. It sounds like it's the type of information that all gun owners should know. I always say that part of being a responsibly armed citizen is getting training, and every gun owner should get training, but it should never be mandated by the state. That's one of my firm beliefs, and it sounds like that 40-hour class is going to cover most everything that people would want to know to, like I said, avoid or win the fight if they can avoid. So, Massad, thank you so much again. I want to truly appreciate you spending the time today. I've learned something. I know people listening to this are going to learn something. So with that, everybody, thank you very much for listening to the Alpha Koncepts Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. If you'd like to reach me, alphaconcepts.com/podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, reach out to Fire Iron Media or go to alphaconcepts.com/podcast. As always, everybody, be armed, be trained, and be alpha.